Hi, Dr. Garrison. Thank you so much for joining me today, talking everything about the label update warnings from the FDA. Could I ask you, Dr. Garrison, why do you think it took 23 years for the scientific consensus to translate into regulatory action? Like, what allowed this fear to persist?
Oh, well, I think there was a lot of misinformation that came from the misinterpreted data that was, we call it the WHI study, but the WHI, the Women's Health Initiative, is actually a large-scale longitudinal data collection that's incredibly valuable and has resulted in over 3,000 individual studies, papers, manuscripts that have been published using that data set. But the first one that was published using that data set, unfortunately, had a lot of misinformation in it. And also there was just a lot of, unfortunately, totally inaccurate information that was publicized about it. And that led to a 23-year moratorium, really, on talking about and thinking about hormone therapy for women. So I think that is really the reason why we haven't had this conversation sooner.
I've heard you speak before about the formulation, how it was very different, what was used in that. Could you explain what the difference is between bioidentical hormones and what the WHI tested?
Bioidentical is a nonsensical marketing term. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's kind of like if you call something natural. What does that actually mean? Do you know?
It sounds good, doesn't it? It feels good.
It does sound good. I mean, bioidentical sounds very, very fancy. But it's a word that's meant to imply that these hormones are somehow safer or more effective than prescription hormone therapy. But really, every single component of hormone therapy, so that's typically estradiol and progesterone if you have a uterus. But, estradiol is a form of estrogen. There's many different forms of estrogen that your body produces. Estradiol is one of them, and that's typically what we give to women today in hormone therapy. Estradiol is a chemical that has a physical structure. It has a three-dimensional structure that if you change one single atom on that structure, it becomes a different molecule. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the estradiol that you get from a pharmaceutical product, the estradiol that you get from soybeans, the estradiol that you get from isolating from other sources, it's all the same molecule. The question is, how was it made, or isolated? And during that isolation process, what comes along with it, right? That's really the question. And so I think, replacing the hormones that your body makes, that's definitely what we do today. And so I think that's where that word came from. But I think we have to separate this sort of marketing stuff from what's real. Now, with respect to the hormones that were used in that original WHI study, they're very different from the hormones that are used in menopausal hormone therapy today. So I already talked about what's primarily used today. The WHI study used a small molecule, a pharmaceutical that mimics progesterone, but was not progesterone. So a drug that binds to progesterone receptors actually with a different and higher affinity than progesterone does itself. So to take a step back, remember when we're talking about hormones, these are signaling molecules that your body produces that mediate some of this Wi-Fi kind of communication that happens between different tissues. So signaling that happens across large distances and timescales in your body. And in order for a hormone to work, you need the hormone itself, but by itself, it doesn't do anything. It has to actually bind to a receptor on the target tissue. So you need at least those two components for things to actually happen. And so how the hormone interacts with those receptors is very important. And for progesterone, there's one receptor, but for estradiol and for other estrogens, there are many receptors. And where those receptors are actually physically present and how many of them there are, that changes over time. And so it's complicated. So the hormones that, the estrogens that were part of the hormone therapy that were used in the WHI study, were conjugated equine estrogens. So this is actually, it's a product called Premarin, which is a very complex mixture of a lot of different things, many things we don't even know what they are, that was isolated from pregnant horse urine, which is a really great and rich source of estrogens. But what that means is that, well, there certainly is estradiol present in Premarin. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of other molecules there in different amounts, and we don't know exactly what those were doing. So that combination is completely different from what we use today. And those, estradiol binds to the receptors differently than the conjugated equine estrogens that were in Premarin. And so you don't want to mix these up, because the data using those hormones is not relevant for the hormones that we're using today. Does that make sense? The benefits, the risks, they're completely different.
Thank you so much for explaining that, and actually giving a lot of extra information about.
Hopefully that wasn't too much.
But it's just, so interesting, because it's just not something that I think about. You hear a word and you think it's all the same thing. But so thank you for really explaining that.
Now when you hear that word bioidentical, think marketing ploy.
Yes. Bioidentical, natural, XX. What was your reaction when you heard about the FDA decision? Do you think it will actually change prescribing behavior?
That's a complicated question. So I had heard that this was going to happen, so it wasn't a surprise. I think it's a move in the right direction, in the sense that the warnings that were included with hormone therapy were quite alarming, as someone who has seen them, and they were inaccurate. And so from the perspective of the prescriber, I think there was a lot of trepidation around prescribing hormones from a legal and a liability standpoint, and that, I hope, has been removed with the removal of those black box warnings. But then also from the perspective of the patient and the person taking the medication, when you open up a prescription and you read something that tells you, this is going to cause cancer, and you should be on for the shortest period of time possible, and all kinds of crazy things that were in these black box warnings, it really, I think, dampens your enthusiasm for using these interventions, to actually treat the problems that you're experiencing. And so I hope that both of those barriers are now removed. And whether or not it will lead to an increase in prescribing, I think we're yet to see that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because it's something in researching this that I've spoken to a lot of doctors, and they have spoken about how they feared litigation with prescribing HRT or MHT, as we're doing now. And yeah, so hopefully this will go some way to help, and also individuals. Because speaking to women, I'm still surprised that a lot are still willing to think that it's better to suffer with the symptoms than to perhaps put themselves at risk. And then when you ask, well, what's the risk you're fearing? It's a little bit gray there. So would you have any words of advice from your side that you would say to a woman who's suffering with symptoms but still afraid because perhaps of maybe even subconsciously what she heard or learned many years ago?
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. The misinformation, in the absence of real information, the misinformation comes in, and it's a real challenge. I would say, what I tell my friends and my sisters is that, hormone therapy is a Band-Aid. Let's be perfectly clear. It's not going to, revolutionize your life and cure you of all disease. But for women in perimenopause and at and after menopause, it is the best Band-Aid we have to do two things. One is to mitigate those symptoms that you're talking about of perimenopause, things like hot flashes and sleep disruption and, weaker bones and brain fog. and I'm not going to go through all of them. There's over 100 symptoms that we associate with perimenopause that are related to fluctuations in ovarian hormones. And while we can't, hormone therapy is incomplete, and it's only replacing a few of those, it's still better than nothing. But beyond symptoms, hormone therapy after menopause is really the best and only way we have to reduce the risk that comes with menopause with respect to cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis. So we know that estrogen is absolutely essential for cardiovascular health and also for preventing bone fractures and osteoporosis. So from that perspective, from mitigating health risks, I think that every woman should consider it. But this is a place where individualized, personalized care is very important. And this is a conversation between a woman and her doctor. And, it's really a risk reward, a risk benefit analysis. And it has so much to do with who you are as an individual, what your health history is, what your genetic risk factors are, how old you are, and what your environmental exposures have been. Those are the kinds of things that you need to consider when you're thinking about hormone therapy. But I genuinely think that the conversation should be flipped from what it is today. Today, because of all of the misinformation and all of the challenges that came from the WHI study misinterpretation, what we do today is we have in the past just prescribed hormone therapy to treat symptoms for the shortest amount of time possible. And the question was, do you want to go on hormone therapy? Should you go on hormone therapy? Is this something, and that's the default, is that you're not on hormone therapy, but maybe we could give it to you if there was, if everything aligned. But I think if you flip that and say, hormone therapy is safe for most women, it's beneficial for most women, and so it should be the default that you should potentially consider hormone therapy, unless you have a specific risk factor that would, make it so that you don't want to take it. So it's just kind of to turn that around and to have it be a little bit more, a lot more common, actually. I think there's data around, and I haven't diligenced it, but the estimate was that there's something like 50 million women who avoided or were denied hormone therapy by their doctors since 2003. Because of the fear that was created by these warnings and by this misinformation. And so, that's a 50 million women who have potentially suffered unnecessarily. So
that's a 50. 50.
50. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, it's crazy. And I hope that doctors are listening to this, thinking about this, because certainly, my experience in the UK and Ireland is that it's very much like you going to the doctor saying you've got X, Y, and Z symptoms. And if you tick enough boxes that you might get prescribed something. So I love this idea about flipping the thinking.
Flip the script. Yeah.
Flip the script. What are the risks of not going on it? Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Garrison, for your time and expertise and sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. And so nice to see you.
You too. Thank you.